Good morning, I'm WaywornWyrm, and welcome to my channel. And welcome to episode 16 of Hoard of the Dragon Queen, Frulam Mondath. They made their way back into the shrine and looked at the trap door at the top of the ladder in one corner of the shrine. Flintfinder stepped forward a moment later. I suppose I'll go first. Tess stepped forward as well. I'll follow right behind. We have no idea what's up there. Well, we do, but it's not an excellent idea. We don't know much. Somewhere up there is a human who could tame Cyan Wrath. That speaks volumes about that individual. Flintfinder climbed the ladder and with one arm pushed up the trap door, which was under a heavy rug, and when it finally fell to the floor, he looked around inside the room. It was a very simple room, but clearly comfortable. Not too small, but not too large either. The main area of the room contained a writing desk with a stool behind it, several tables covered in books and papers, and a mirror on a floor stand. There were 2 oil lamps giving the room its light, and Flintfinder noticed that the entire floor was covered in rugs, like the one that had hidden the trapdoor. Sitting at the desk was a human woman in chainmail with a halberd leaning against it. At the moment, there was a quill in her hand, and she was clearly in the middle of writing some papers. She turned and looked down at Flintfinder's head, poking through the trapdoor, and with a look somewhere between amusement and annoyance, she said, "Oh, well, this is unexpected, and will not do." She neatly sat down her quill and picked up her halberd. "A little help in here would be nice," she called down the hallway out of the room. Flintfinder quickly went the rest of the way up the ladder and pulled out his swords. He shouted down to his companions, "Sounds like we're about to have company." Then he charged at Frulam. With a slash from his longsword, he cut deep into her, popping open one of the many rings in her chainmail. He followed up this attack with a thrust from his short sword, which also found a weak spot in her armor. Frulam seemed to go into a rage from the strikes from Flintfinder and started swinging wildly with her halberd. Unfortunately, for her at least, she was all too easy to dodge and parry. Several guards could be heard running down the corridor as a jam of people started at the bottom of the rope ladder in the shrine. Tess finished making her way up and charged at Frulam, hitting her with her greatsword. She got deep, but Frulam was still up, although starting to look like she was going to fall any second. Garrett popped up the ladder next and also attacked their beleaguered foe. A thrust from his longsword was enough to kill her. Mara and Quara quickly followed Garrett up the ladder as Flintfinder pointed at the door and said, "More coming from here." As he said that, 3 armored cultists with spears and shields entered the room, quickly followed by 8 other cultists with robes and scimitars. Morn ended up being the last up the ladder due to the jam of people, but it had finally cleared and he entered the room to see a mass of enemies conveniently lined up for him. He ran close to them, spreading his fingers and touching his thumbs together, sending flames jetting out from his hands. One of the armored cultists and half of the unarmored cultists burst into flames as they were unable to dodge out of the way. The others managed to avoid the worst of it, but they were still singed. Morn quickly backed up away from them after that. Tess moved to cut off the incoming cultists and swung her greatsword at one of the armored ones, who was able to block Tess's sword with her shield. Garrett followed Tess and swung with his sword, taking one out, continuing with a kick at another, who fell to the ground, ending the armored cultists. He then chopped at a 3rd cultist, but they blocked him. Mara came into the killing field that was the hallway of death, taking out one of the 4 remaining cultists with her mace. Another one was unable to dodge her sacred light. Flint Finder quickly finished off the last two, ending the resistance in the cave. Although they did not know that at the moment. As the fight ended, Flint Finder went back to the desk to start looking through the papers as Tess found the key Frulam had and quickly went back down into the shrine to see what had been put into the box. By the time Tess had returned with a string of pearls, a ring made of gold with sapphires set in it, and a pouch of several precious stones, Flint Finder had sorted the papers into 3 piles. She looked at him in the 3 piles, one of which was much larger than the other 2, and seemed to be made up of most of the papers with a cocked eyebrow. He looked at her, and then down at the papers, and back up. Well, this largest pile, he began before shoving them to the floor, seems to be made up of poetry about dragons. It's bad. Moving over to the next pile, he continued. These couple of pages appear to be a manifest of everything the cult has. I'm not sure of what most of it means, but it's fairly irrelevant because of a note scrawled onto the top page. This note says, "Everything must be freighted north to Neantar. Resmir allowed us to keep some pearls, a ring, and a handful of small stones," which I imagine is what you have from the box of the shrine. Tess nodded and showed them to Flint Finder and the rest of them. Flint Finder nodded before picking up a final paper, which was apparently the entirety of the 3rd stack. Tess had initially thought the pile was a small number of papers, but it was apparently just one. A rather thick one, at that. This is a map. It's rather simple and crude, but it shows the green fields in each village and town that was targeted by the raiders. Leosin was probably correct about the cult. There seems to be about another 3 villages that they had not raided yet, so they probably would have been here for another few months if we had not caused them to accelerate their plans. One thing of note on this map is an arrow pointing from a mark that I believe indicates this town, or this cave, to the town of Baragost on the tradeway. Now, he started looking at the looks of fear on everyone's face. Greenest was a decent-sized town, but it paled in comparison to Baragost. If the cult was planning on taking on Baragost, it was much larger and better prepared than they had thought, than any of them, even Leosin, had thought. Now, he said again before continuing, at first it looked like maybe Baragost was a target, but there's another arrow pointing from Baragost following the coastway north. I believe it shows us where they're going. I think they plan on going to Baragost and then joining caravan north to Neantar, like the note on the manifest says. I think it's time we meet up with Leosin in Urtrell, and then we probably travel down the river Chianthar and meet up with the caravan by Baldur's Gate. They'll probably stop there to hire on guards to help them travel across the fields of the dead on their way to the tradeway up at Dragonspar Castle. At which point they'll probably travel to Neantar, wherever or whatever that is. How can you be sure they'll go that far north? Mara asked. Because despite the fields of the dead, most of the coast up past Waterdeep is fairly civilized and well known. I've never heard of a place called Neantar. Have any of you? Looking around at the group, Flint Finder saw no one had before he continued. Therefore, it's a good guess that this place is somewhere north of Waterdeep, almost certainly north of Baldur's Gate. So it's a good guess that they'll stop at Baldur's Gate and will hopefully fit into their group there. Almost everyone who could recognize us from the raid is either of the attacks on the camp is dead. So we're at little risk of that. With that, they left the cave and made their way back to Greenest, where they found that the pearls and ring had come from, and they returned them to their rightful owners, who were beyond grateful. They had thought that these precious heirlooms had been lost. They then found out that no one knew who the stones had belonged to, so they were able to keep the stones. They then had a final meeting with Governor Nighthill, where he thanked them yet again and made sure that they knew that they were always welcome in Greenest. He informed them that before Leosin had left, he had bought everyone in the party horses and proper riding gear, which they gladly took. It'd be about 200 miles to Ethereal, and the horses would significantly shorten the journey. In fact, assuming the loot from the cult was loaded on freight wagons, which was a common sight in this part of the world, they might be able to either beat the cult to Baldur's Gate, or at least get there at about the same time as the cult, which would allow them to join the cult's caravan on the first day, even though it would probably stay in Baldur's Gate for several. Thank you so much for listening to episode 16 of Hoard of the Dragon Queen. Tune in tomorrow for another episode of the Monster Manual Backward, where we will be diving into deer, elk, and goats, and the giant varieties of them. Thank you.